Hi, I'm Danielle Wood, Productivity Commission Chair, and I am joined today by Katherine Jones, Secretary of the Attorney General Department and Chair of the Indigenous Champions Network. Today, we're going to be talking about Katherine's efforts to implement Priority Reform 3 of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. Thank you for being with us, Secretary.
Thanks for having me.
As many of you will know, the National Agreement on Closing the Gap sets out 4 priority reforms to change the way that governments work with First Nations Australians. Priority Reform 3 requires governments to structurally transform to ensure that they are responsive to the needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Transformation of this kind involves changes to culture, systems, and processes of government organisations. Katherine, your leadership, both within AGD and across the public service, means a great deal, I think, to those that are looking for meaningful change in this area. So I'm really keen to start with your work leading the Indigenous Champions Network. What is the network and what are you hoping to achieve with it?
So the Champions Network brings together Indigenous champions that are in every department, every agency, right across government. So really broad reach, people from at different levels in their organisations, but all of them that have been chosen by their organisations to lead the engagement on First Nations issues around closing the gap and supporting First Nations staff. So I've got to say it's the privilege of my career because it's bringing together. I get to come together with people who are just so passionate about driving genuine change in their organisations and really supporting First Nations colleagues across the service.
Fantastic. And what are some of the things when you get together? What are some of the initiatives of the network?
We've set ourselves 3 key goals or priorities that we focus on. And the first is implementation of Priority Reform 3.
Excellent.
Transforming the way that government engages with First Nations communities and delivers on the Closing the Gap targets. So that's our number one priority, supported by looking at cultural safety and having very honest, frank, difficult conversations about what it means, listening to First Nations staff's views of what cultural safety means, and thinking about how we take those conversations back into our own organisations. And then the third element is what we can do to contribute systematically, as well as within our own organisations, around boosting First Nations employment. We've had some great successes around First Nations employment in the SES 100 space, but there's a lot more that needs to be done at all levels. So that's a big priority for us. And what I would say is the cultural safety piece and the boosting First Nations employment piece are absolutely mission critical if we're going to achieve progress on embedding Priority Reform 3 across government. Because we need to create workspaces that are safe, respectful, inclusive, and that First Nations staff can flourish and progress in their careers so that we're better capable of driving the transformation agenda through Priority Reform 3.
So you've mentioned Priority Reform 3 there a couple of times. And when you think about or when you kind of reflect on the conversations that you have with senior leaders in the APS, First Nations communities, what do they tell you about how we're progressing, the things we're doing well and the things that we're doing less well?
There's certainly success. So I like to try and frame the conversation around Priority Reform 3 in terms of success, but recognising that there's a long way to go before we can confidently say that right across the breadth of the public service, we're embedding Priority Reform 3. So the first thing I would say is it's not just the responsibility of those areas that have direct connection to First Nations programs or policies. It's not in my department, we have responsibility for native title, for justice reinvestment, and they are areas of responsibility that are directly relevant for First Nations people. But it's equally as important that our work around all the federal courts, our work in privacy, our work in national security, that we're thinking in those spaces around embedding Priority Reform 3. I think the feedback I get is in those areas where there's capability and maturity and expertise about working with First Nations communities, there's optimism and some progress, although a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other big parts of government that we need to really drive an awareness that they have to transform, and that policy and program areas that don't automatically raise connections to First Nations communities where you need to pause and think, well, actually, anything that's the business of the Australian Public Service should have a First Nations lens put on it, and people need the focus, the accountability, and the capability to do that work. Other area, I think there's some good stories of success around co-design of program and service delivery. I see it a little bit in my space. I'll go back to Justice Reinvestment, which is really a community-focused program that's intended to work with communities to come up with very specific community-based approaches to diverting people from the criminal justice system. And it'll look different in every community. So what we've had to learn is don't come into the communities with a preordained idea of what is going to work for them. You've got to sit down, listen, and be prepared to put flexibility into your programs, into your service delivery to support what the community needs, not tell the community what we think it needs.
And what sort of feedback have you had from community on a program like that and how it's working?
So we're in relatively early days. I think there's a feedback that goes to having a sense of ownership that makes people feel that this is something that they have some influence on. That's very meaningful, and I think addresses perhaps some of the understandable cynicism about another government program coming in. The second bit of feedback is, though, you need to commit for the long term. You can't just do this for a year or two and then decide that you're going to go and do something somewhere else. So they're looking for a long-term commitment. They're looking for ensuring that within the program, their decision-making is influential, if not paramount. And that's the hard space for government because we've got all our accountability, our frameworks, uh, um, and our probably in our DNA, the way that government works is to be the ultimate decision maker with programs. So that's why I do think about it as a transformation. It's a big transformation, and I think it's going to take many more years until we're really adept at that, and that we do it in all parts of government.
Interesting. It's very similar themes. We were talking with Gordon de Brouwer, the Public Service Commissioner before, and he was talking about the need to be bold and to shift that kind of paradigm of control. So interesting to hear that reoccur. What role has the priority reform branch that I understand you've established here in the Attorney General's Department, what role has that played in thinking about how to run those programs and policy areas differently?
They're a fantastic team. The establishment of that branch reflects a commitment from myself and the senior leadership of the organisation that we need to have the institutional capability to be able to engage with community, engage across government, and have dedicated focus not only in terms of supporting work like in the justice reinvestment area, but engaging with every part of our department and talking to people about what Priority Reform 3 really means, talking to them about how they need to adjust their approach to their policies or programs, creating spaces where people can be vulnerable, to be honest with you. We have a lot of people that I think have, very genuine intent and that they really want to understand closing the gap, but they think I'm not quite sure how to even tackle that. I'm not quite sure how to approach it. Having the opportunity to speak to everyone across the department, to think about what it means in their space, to think about what the capability is they need in their space to engage with peak organisations, to engage with community, to learn the craft or relearn the craft of being a public servant when your approach is around co-design and giving responsibility for decision making to entities outside of government. So it's a APS craft thing to some degree, but having that team with their expertise, their understanding of engaging with community is making a really significant change in our department and supporting further change.
Fantastic. Well, it has been so wonderful to hear from you about those initiatives. The Indigenous Champions Network, the work you're doing in AGDs, I think is really inspirational for public servants grappling with this question of what does Priority Reform 3 look like and what does good look like. So we're so grateful you could take the time to join us today.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much.